starts.
Now.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Global Technopolitics. Oh.
Is that right?
That's right.
Give me a second because it's messed up. Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the Global Technopolitics Forum's research team meeting on December 5th, 2021. Today we have a very interesting presentation by Eduardo Albrecht. The topic, artificial intelligence and democracy. Are algorithms inclusive of all citizens? This topic is particularly important to the forum and its mission in shaping the conversation at the intersection of technology and geopolitics. And I'm delighted to co-host this event together with our chairman, Greg Traverton. It's timely discussion as there is increasing concern over our democratic values and basic rights being undermined by massive amount of citizen data being collected, stored, transferred, accessed, and mined. The question is the practice inherently dangerous, or should we blame the private sector's self-interest conduct? Or perhaps the blame sits on shoulders of authoritative countries who are aligning technology with their ideology? What about the biases of programmers who are envisioning and encoding values? Or more worrisome is the potential for algorithm itself to take control and lead us to unknown. Today, we're fortunate to have a distinguished speaker to help us to navigate this complex topic. There is an introductory slide which you can see on the screen. So I will give a very brief introduction to save time. Eduardo is a familiar face at the forum. He joined our team last year as an associate, writing his book on the impact of AI on democracy. He serves as the associate professor and program director of international relations at Mercy College in New York, and had many impressive positions over the years. And you can see on the screen all the various positions he had. Again, it's a pleasure to welcome you all here. After Eduardo's presentation, we will have a Q&A session. I encourage you to listen to the presentation, either raise your hand or post question in the chat, and we will read them in proper order during the Q&A session. Now, without further ado, I'm really excited to welcome you here and turn the floor to our speaker, Eduardo. Eduardo, floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Pari. Shall I start with the presentation?
Let's do it.
All right, so today we'll be talking about the impact of artificial intelligence on democracy and the question of whether algorithms are inclusive of all citizens and how, if in any way, the very conditions of citizenships are changing with the introduction of this technology. I'll be joined with my research associates, Davina Resto and Aurora Rudd. We'll be talking a little bit about the future directions of AI. But first, I think we need to start with the concept which we call the informatized body. You can't really understand AI without first addressing the fact that our bodies have been transformed into information in a way that has never really been part of our political experience. Everything we do in many different ways is all collected and turned into information. So what we did in this book is we tried to start with, where did this approach begin? And one place where it started was in the 1880s in Paris, where the police started using what was known as the Bertillon system, or anthropometrics, in which hair and eye color, skull and foot size, etc., were all collected in order to make sure that the police had caught the right suspect, because it was very common that people would change their names. So that's one place it started. Then in the 1920s in South Africa, mass fingerprinting was introduced. And this was introduced by the British, who were interested in managing and controlling the African miners in their territories. Jonathan Finn, in his book, Capturing the Criminal Image, discusses how this, in fact, is connected with issues of identity and issues of power, because it's very important to underline that there's one group that is collecting the information and the other group that is providing the information. In the 1930s, with the fad of eugenics, this is further expanded in schools, hospitals, asylums, and the like, in which these bureaucracies were involved in collecting data on physical characteristics. For example, some characteristics were deemed desirable, others were deemed undesirable. And we all know how that got out of hand in Germany. But two novelties were introduced to the approach that states had to the citizens' bodies. The first is that these efforts at collecting data were often cast in the interest of the greater good. So there was always some kind of an ideological motive behind this type of data collection. And the second, which I argue in the book is very important to understanding how data collection occurs today, is that it introduced a deductive approach to data collection on the body. And an example of eugenics would be something like, if a pronounced brow indicates a propensity to drink, and Bob has a pronounced brow, then Bob is a potential alcoholic. So that deductive approach is informing a lot of these efforts to collect data. In the 1990s, with the introduction of automation in the United States, facial recognition technology starts to really expand, or FRT. And it utilizes computer vision to identify people, and it's used, for example, in border control and law enforcement. And I'm sure we all heard a lot about this recently, especially in places like China, where it's been taken to the next level. Some critiques of FRT, or facial recognition technologies, is that it tends to be used in wealthier areas to monitor people that come from outside of that wealthy area. Another issue is in the technology itself. Trained mostly on people of, let's say, race X, and then used on people of races X, Y, and Z, it is less accurate when identifying people in races Y and Z. And in fact, the Green Light Project in Detroit was criticized for this very reason. And they were using FRT to monitor people entering and exiting stores. And in several cases, it led to the arrest of the wrong Black man because of false positives. So that's been one issue that's been debated quite a lot. I have to emphasize, however, that the informatized body is not only physical. And this is a very important aspect for today's discussion. Psychological aspects are also on file. It's not just the face or the body size, but it's also what people are thinking or how people are feeling that is increasingly on file. In the 2000s, facial emotion recognition technology, or FER, really started to be expanded. In fact, today it's quite sophisticated, in which, combined with FRT, you can see what emotion somebody is purportedly feeling. And this is theoretically based in Paul Ekman's work, the 6 universal expressions, which are disgust, surprise, sad, fear, happy, contempt. Paul Ekman argues that these are universal expressions, so all cultures and all peoples in the world feel these same expressions and express them in the same way, which is in turn based in evolutionary biology. One example, one use case of facial emotion recognition is the 2003, the US Transportation Security Administration introduced this in its airports, and they trained officers to screen passengers according to their facial expression to identify possible terrorists. That was considered a big fiasco. No terrorism arrests were made. And if you can try to remember the atmosphere in the country in 2003, there was a lot of people that were being stopped just for having Middle Eastern origins. So the TSA was accused of racial profiling. Some, I think, deeper critiques of facial emotion recognition have been put forth by Lisa Feldman Barrett, a psychologist, who in her book, How Emotions Are Made, she says that emotions really cannot be easily classified at all. And to quote her, emotions emerge as a combination of the physical properties of your body, a flexible brain that wires itself to whatever environment it develops in, and your culture and upbringing. So it's really hard to label emotions. That's what she argues. I'll hand it over now to Aurora, who will talk a little bit about some future directions for data collections on the body.
Yes. So as of now, we have smartwatches such as Apple Watches that can monitor heart rate, and that will continue to kind of evolve. So there will be facial recognition technology cameras that can be increasingly fit with sensors that monitor vital signs like temperature and heart rate. There will be increased focus on wearable technology that can expand into monitor blood chemistry like cortisol levels, which will allow for data to be sent directly to smartphones and allow for really efficient monitoring of a person's health. Real world sensor data and digital biomarkers are the new frontier of pharma. They can print sensors now directly onto human skin, which allows for a smaller and more discrete monitoring of health. They're also doing research on smart shoes and clothes and even jewelry that can make it an even more personalized approach to wearing these technologies, which might even make them more widespread. There are also some concerns. The data collected by this type of technology can suggest optimal mix of information to nudge behavior, where state agencies could monitor vitals of large populations and sponsor initiatives that would nudge collective behavior a certain way. And this can also often happen without citizens really knowing that it's happening because they're being influenced. Data streams will also increasingly converge between private and public entities. The concerns around this is that a lot of the research and programs that are being done is funded or partly funded by the state. So private and public entities are able to share information. This can allow authorities to argue that for the greater good or in the interest of public or national health, they have to store and collect this data. And that can allow for citizens to kind of be more in the dark about what's happening. There is also an increased need for biometrics in identity, border and national security and healthcare management, which makes the funding that states can put into these new solutions even greater.
Thanks a lot, Aurora. And now we'll hand it over to Davina, who'll talk about future directions of data collection on people's mental states.
Thank you. So yeah, as you heard, Aurora talked a little bit about things like facial recognition and kind of the physical aspect of data collection, but there's also this kind of emotional level of data collection that we're seeing, and things like speech emotion recognition, which will have the ability to use mics and phones and smart speakers to identify emotions. And we're seeing this in health companies now, and specifically like Sonde Health, who have developed this vocal biomaker, right? And the use of this instrument is to listen to you speak, and it has the ability to sense what kind of state of emotion that you are in. And this can trigger the AI to get the specific kind of help that you need. And so then we go into Vibra Image, which is another company now that is using head vibrations to also be able to detect the state of emotion that you are in. And we are seeing Vibra Image being used in places like FIFA World Cups or Olympic Games, massive kind of global competitive games competitions. And then recently, there are some researchers in South Korea who are creating 5G technology that will be connected with cell towers and 5G towers that will allow to bounce signals off people and map emotions. And how this looks is, for example, if you are driving down your car in a road and you're kind of driving erratically or upset, these kind of 5G towers have the ability to pick up that you are in a state of distress. And that signal can allow the AI tech to alert the authorities or alert the proper, specific, like if you have a crowd around you, it will also allow the crowd to know that you are in a state of distress. And so those are kind of the things that we are seeing in the progress of speech emotion recognition. And then another new development, and that we'll be seeing a lot of advancement in, is the idea of looking at your brain waves. And we see this in China right now, where they are using the NeuroCap, which is a wireless sensor that sits on your head in a hat or a cap of their workers and employees. And it just kind of is monitoring your emotions. And identifying whether you're in a level of stress or a level of anxiety. And this also allows for the tweaking of workflows, including employee placement and breaks to increase productivity and profits. So this neurocap will allow employees to say, hey, it looks like John needs a break today, or John needs to go home, or maybe John's had a good day today. And those advances are going to start being more advanced in those kinds of brainwave caps. And then we're also seeing it in Neuralink, which is rising in technology in these kind of brainwave tech. And they're based in California, and they have these sensors that are placed directly into the brain. And this allows for a better way to read your emotions, and it allows you to be able to, also the hope of the technology is to be able to allow you to think something with the Neuralink technology inside of your head. I want to pick this up or pick this up, and it will do that for you. So like this last part says, far more info about emotions can be pushed to software this way versus a keyboard, microphone, or sensor. So a lot of brainwave technology is coming forth.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Aurora and Davina. And by the way, I'd like to point out that they've helped me a lot with this research, so they've been really pivotal in this work. I'd like to speak a little bit more in detail about this fact that the informatized body speaks and writes. And I want to delve into more depth into this technology called natural language processing, which I'm sure you've all heard about before. Starting in the 2010s with machine learning advances and just more data available through the internet, NLP has been able to really hone in on the emotions that somebody is expressing in their written or verbalized language transcribed into text. But it's not just negative, neutral, or positive emotions. It's also things like somebody's political stance, their intent, their opinions, and levels of political radicalization or extremism. One example of NLP in action is in 2020, the European Union launched something called the Red Alert System. RED stands for Real-Time Early Detection. And as Monica Floria, the project coordinator, puts it, RED can process massive amounts of unstructured data, such as social media posts, to identify meaningful relationships and spot potential threats. It helps law enforcement keep up with the abundance of information within the terrorist domain and the widespread dissemination of disinformation. Now, this leads nicely into the topic of cognitive hacking, where I'd really like to land on for this presentation. Cognitive hacking is when people use NLP or related technologies to monitor and predict mass behavior like protest and electoral preferences, and then nudge that mass behavior into a desired political direction. Cognitive hacking is countered by cognitive security. So if people may find themselves thinking that things that were planted in their mind without them knowing, these may have been planted by nefarious or foreign actors intent on creating real-world political outcomes. This requires that the state protect itself and, of course, its citizens. The question is, should we fight fire with fire? Should states deploy their own technologies to prod citizens back onto more favorable paths? This leads to a scenario where foreign actors seek to nudge citizens' emotions one way and domestic actors the other. Or in fact, factions of foreign actors and factions of domestic actors are all nudging citizens' behavior this way or that way. So much so that NATO identifies this human domain as the 6th level of international warfare. In the words of a NATO review, Countering Cognitive Warfare, it is not simply an issue of countering propaganda, as it was in the past, but a matter of countering the imposition of certain emotional states with other emotional states. Now, one issue is privacy. Are we okay with our private sentiment data used for public political purposes? This has brought Firmin de Brubander in his book, Life After Prophecy, to point out that does it even make sense to speak of privacy anymore? But what I think is the real issue at hand, as Gillian Tett, the journalist at the Financial Times, puts it, is that AI technology is emotive because it challenges us to think about what it means to be human and have human agency. In fact, the big questions I think for today are, how autonomous are our political decisions? For example, voting, if we're being nudged unaware this way or that way. And the second question, which I'd like to put forth to the group today, is will cognitive hacking or cognitive security AI models ever become so complex that officials do not fully understand their decisions? And in fact, this is one of the critiques of the black box of machine learning technology, for example, that not even the programmers really know why the output is as it is, why the AI is making the decisions it's making. If so, will humans lose control over certain aspects of governance itself? And if so, will it progressively matter less whom we vote for? And can AI adequately represent the people? So I think these are the real challenges for democracy. And we'll end here. And I'm excited to discuss this with all you folks today.
Well, thank you very much, Eduardo, for sharing your thoughts, and also Aura and Davina. I think it was very enlightening presentation and thought-provoking one. And I hand over the floor to Greg for his comments.
Thanks, Patty. No, it was a terrific presentation, Eduardo, and raises so many issues. I suppose your challenge will be how do you bound the things you want to do, because the issues are so rich. We know the technology is advancing very rapidly. I've been engaged with a neuroscience company here in California, and what's caught my eye from their work is they do mostly work on PTSD, but we've been doing other work related to cognition. And what got my attention was when using FNIRS, not MRI, but FNIRS, a wearable technology similar to the caps you talked about, you can actually tell by someone's brain behavior better whether they're being convinced or not by an argument than by their own self-report. So the explosion of information about us, whether we like it or not, is going to be enormous. Trying to bound your inquiry, I think the right one is where you seem to be going, which is ultimately, what does this mean for democracy? Which is kind of the overarching question. There are lots of big questions about privacy along the way, and I think that the idea that privacy is at least changed pretty dramatically, and I worry about the next phase of privacy regulations when it'll be if you have 100 sensors on your body. It seems to me something like the GDPR is almost irrelevant, because how can you give meaningful consent to all that kind of data being collected? So that's a big problem along the way. But I think going to the ultimate issue, which is one that people, Henry Kissinger has been writing about, which is what does AI ultimately mean for how we think about human cognition, and even how we think about humans. His illustration in his book is the AI Go player that was given only the rules of the game and 4 hours to play against itself and beat every other machine-aided Go system in the world, and did so by making moves that humans had never made, had never conceived, and maybe never could have conceived. So that's his illustration of does this mean that in some sense what we think of as cognition or even brain function is going to be different. And you pose the more immediate problem, which is when we get these algorithms so complicated that people don't understand them, like the Go illustration. I think about that from my own work in government. If the algorithm is so opaque that the people using it can't understand it exactly, they're not going to trust it very much. And they're certainly not going to be able to communicate it very clearly. Now, that seems to me to be the thing we'll get to sooner. And then there's also concerns from a security standpoint about cracking into algorithms, about algorithms doing things we don't expect them to, end up being autonomous, more autonomous than we expect them to be. But it's a very rich set of issues. Maybe if you'd say one more word, Eduardo, about exactly, or at least at this stage, what would you like to be able to be clearer about at the end than you are now? I always find that a useful question to ask when I'm doing a book. It's not exactly what's the question I'm trying to answer, but what is it I'd like to understand much better now after the book than I do now?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Greg. And in fact, a question emerged, which I didn't expect would emerge after we finished these chapters. And it's the tension that exists between more accurate technologies that require more data. So maybe we have an inherent interest in providing more data to the AI, because that would help make it more accurate, and it would reduce the issue of bias, like I described in the Green Light Project in Detroit. But to do that, we have to completely give up our previous notions of privacy, as you correctly pointed out. Does it, make sense that we have informed consent and stuff like that? So there's this trade-off between these two values that emerged, I think, as a central question from this initial research for these two chapters. The trade-off between more accuracy and less privacy. And I think that that's part of this broader umbrella of group versus private rights, individual rights. So a lot of our democratic institutions have been kind of built on the foundation of individual rights, stuff like free speech, privacy, while we're moving into a new era in which group rights are becoming more central. So, for example, security, or making sure that algorithms are fair and equitable. Also protecting certain minorities. These group rights, I think, are coming to the forefront of the conversation, while individual rights are being left behind. Now, my main concern with this trend is that this means that groups will fight over who has access to be able to provide input to the machines regarding their group. So we'll see that certain groups will be left behind, and other groups will kind of become a new elite that has access to the AI. So I envision a kind of dystopic society in which we have a pyramid, in which at the top we have AI that's making the decisions. Underneath that first level, which is not even human, so we have a kind of aristocracy without aristocrats. Underneath that level, we'll have the groups that have privileged access to calibrating the ethical parameters of the AI. And then beneath that, we will have the groups that will simply live within the systems that are governed by that AI. So that worries me, because I see political tensions rising in that sense.
Yeah, that's pretty dystopian, isn't it? It really, it really is. I wonder if my analogy would be with after 9/11. After 9/11, people were quite prepared to surrender lots of privacy in the name of security. And I wonder, in the wake of the pandemic, now so far we've had this big political debate about silly things like masks and vaccinations, but I wonder if people will be similarly prepared to surrender lots more information in pursuit of health security. So far, I haven't quite seen it, but I imagine it's coming. Imagine when we get sensors that can immediately detect whether you've got COVID or have been exposed to COVID. Already those are close. So that seems a concrete illustration of the kind of direction you're suggesting in your work.
Exactly.
Let me open it up to other people. I know other people, it's such a rich presentation. Other people may have comments and questions.
Yeah, one comment I had, I worry about human agency, because I think with what you're saying, AI is becoming more aware of our thoughts and our feelings. In this case, what happens to our agency, especially if democratic process is also compromised, and if we are feeling that AI going to be on the top, and then another level and another level, so we are losing our democratic rights and we are losing our agency. How do you see that?
That's very much the argument Kissinger makes.
Yeah, the issue of agency, I think, is the central one, and how that relates to institutions. Because as I mentioned before, current legacy institutions are based on this idea that we are somehow sort of isolated in the way that we can make a decision, that we can you can think on your own. Sure, you're exposed to information and to propaganda, and a politician may make a speech, but where we're at now is that we might be making decisions without knowing what the influences are. And that's what I open up to the group. I mean, I think that it's a big issue. We'll probably be dealing with it for the next 20, 50 years.
Absolutely. Others who'd like to jump in?
I've just been so amazed to see how we talk about democracy, but at the end of the day, the end result is we use democracy to consolidate our power and edge out others. The most egregious manifestation of this was Citizens United, where through a democratic process and Supreme Court, now we have a mechanism in place to curtail individual rights and individual votes and completely capture our democratic process. So I tend to have a little bit of a cynical view down the road as to what this is going to do. I find it so easy, first of all, to co-opt people to giving up their individual rights by just scaring them. I mean, we've seen it since 9/11, how easy it is to scare a whole country. This is not exactly like a third world uneducated country. We're the Western country. We have access to schools, education, news, everything. And yet we were so easily co-opted into this war on terror and to otherizing others. And also I see another thing, the younger generation, how easily they just give up their personal information. Just look at your 16-year-old and 15-year-old going on TikTok or Snapchat and whatever, and how easy they just put on everything. Oh, you want my address? Here it is. This is how old I am. This is what I like. This is what I look like. Here are all my photos. So that does not bode well for the future generation.
I'd like to, if possible, take the opportunity to introduce Patrizia Felletig, who's joining us from Italy. She's an advisor along with myself at the Guarini Institute at John Cabot University. She's very active in these topics in the European Union. She's worked in financial institutions, the energy sector. She's worked with nuclear decommissioning, and she's published on energy, environmental issues. And she's also the chairwoman of Copernicani, which is a very interesting nonprofit association aimed at supporting the digital transformation of society by means of cultural and educational projects. Patrizia, I hope it's okay that I highlighted you a little bit.
No, welcome. Great to have you.
Thank you very much. For you, it's early mid-morning. For me, it's really supper time, nearly supper time. But anyway, first of all, thank you so much, Eduardo, for your presentation. Really very insightful and very very dire doom future we have. I wonder if artificial intelligence can pair with artificial unconsciousness in certain way. But the things that you are, the issue and the question you are all posing are very timely, of course. We had last year in December 2020, we had a forum called on digital and democracy. And the aim of this conference was the encounter between politics and academics to a better understanding what the challenge of digital technology are posing to democracy, to electoral system, political representation, and so on. And what is interesting is also to see the positive, what digital can do, the good thing that digital can do, and how it can fight also political polarization, because it can encourage and can make it more extreme, but maybe it can also help. So it's interesting to examine a little more in depth these aspects. So I think that these sort of conversation and talks are very important, but I guess that we are all almost aware of where we are going, while there is no sort of certificate for all the citizens to become an aware digital citizen. And this is really very important. It should be taught already at school, and it's not, because everything, technology is running much faster than the legislative parts, the norms. So that's what's happening. Thank you for your presentation. Really, it was very, very interesting.
Thanks for joining, Patrizia.
I had a visit last week from some Swedish colleagues, and they're actually going to be part of a new psychological security agency in Sweden. And they were asking all these questions, interesting questions, and particularly their concern is the one you raised, Eduardo. Should we fight fire with fire? And because they think their charter is really mostly looking at the foreign threat, foreign psychological, what we would have called before wars or psyops threat, now much broader. But they also recognize that there's a domestic dimension to this, and how they deal with the domestic piece, let alone how they think about countering. Certainly countering the foreign threat is well within their charter, but they also recognize that localities will be concerned about the effects of these kinds of operations, even done domestically, not by foreign actors. And that's a very difficult divide for them particularly, but I think in general, it's a very big question for all of us. My instinct is always that the last thing we want to do is fight fire with fire, but because that makes it more likely that you'll get burned. But it's worth at least examining that proposition. It seems to me, at least if we fight fire with fire, our fire ought to be truthful, has to be truthful, not fiction. But that's only the beginning of talking about that topic.
Yeah, Greg, what it does, it's going to force us to take a side. And even in domestic political factions, the majority of conflicts worldwide are not between states, they're within states.
Right.
So I think we can expect faction A and faction B to be utilizing these technologies to nudge citizenry one way or the other, as we have seen in 2016 election and Brexit, and I'm sure you are all aware of the media conversations around those tensions. So I'm afraid that the horse is out of the barn.
Yeah,
it's gone. Yeah, we can't stop. We can't. The Luddites are not going to help us. So now it's really a moral question. If fire is the only way that you can counter fire, then do you use that? Do you use that force? And do you just pray that you are on the right side of history, because you might be using it, but then if you fast forward 100 years, you're the bad guy in the textbooks, the history textbooks.
Well, in some ways, go ahead.
I wanted to invite Puran as well. We haven't heard his views, but I'm sorry I interrupted you. Why don't you make your comments, and then we can ask Puran to make some comments.
I was going to say it's in some ways harder still, because we all know that the most effective disinformation is disinformation that has a kernel of truth to it.
Yeah.
Puran.
First of all, thank you very much, Eduardo, for a very scintillating, if I could say, the presentation which you have given to all of us. I have 2-3 questions to sort of put back to you. One, while we are talking about what we are talking about, how do we really test the premise on solid philosophical foundations? We all know that free will, value, ethics, and then human agency. Human agency is the one agency which sort of carries these values forward for keeping some kind of sanity within society, within people, among community, and that also leads to other things, which is free will, freedom of speech, free assembly. And therefore, I would really like to figure out, how do we really test the proposition that you have forwarded on some kind of a philosophical foundations? Because unless we try and put some kind of a philosophical foundation to what we are trying to theorize, may not really gel with economists, political scientists, and the philosophers as well. So how do we really test the whole thesis on some kind of philosophical foundation, which also takes into account value, free will, and which is something which is going to be exercised by the human agency? One. The second part of my thinking is that while we have many things developing all at one go, and as we talked about playing fire with fire, but then there are many inventions and discoveries which are taking place. And they're taking place at the cusp of quantum computing, artificial intelligence, and biotechnology. If we were to sort of, or somebody were to combine these 2-3 things together, what really happens to the place called society that we all live in? And would you also try to sort of play out a few scenarios for future, as you talked about, artificial intelligence on the top, and then everything either in the middle or at the bottom. How do we really sort of try and unsackle the philosophical foundation on which it could all be tested? The second thing is all about how do we really see a scenario panning out when we mix and merge artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and medical biotechnology. And finally, what kind of a society, I mean, these are the democratic things that we're talking about, but what really happens in case the things go the way we are talking about? What really happens to economic well-being of the people? Because we're only confining ourselves to politics and sensory things and cognitive hacking, et cetera, et cetera. But what really happens to larger economic system, which really takes the human agency forward? And that also means that we could then not well imagine economic development, or if it happens in a very distorted way. So I'm really trying to sort of raise these issues, which I feel would be equally important to consider than to just look at what might happen in a gloom and doom kind of a way. Eduardo.
Thank you, Puran. And in fact, I don't want to just bring gloom and doom to this conversation. I think that there should always be a silver lining to every cloud. To answer your first question about the philosophical foundations to what is happening, it looks to me that practical issues like profit, security are always operating on a short-term cycle. So security is a need that you have to solve now. Same for food. While ideas or the philosophical domain is operating on a long-term cycle, so that the ideas of humanism and the Renaissance were then they were made into institutions in the founding fathers in the American Constitution. So there's always a delay. So I think that the conversations, the philosophical conversations that we're having, are far behind what is actually happening in practice, which is on a short-term cycle. In fact, I'm going to divert this question to Davina and Aurora and maybe Tingying, who might be of a younger generation, whose ideas, whose philosophical thinking will impact what will happen in the future more than ours. To quickly address your second question about quantum computing, I think that nobody has really understood just the level of the impact that that's going to have. Because what I've understood from quantum computing is that it makes use, and I'm not joking or being hyperbolic, of alternate dimensions in order to make calculations in this dimension. This will impact the fabric of the universe in a way that we just cannot fathom, that our human brains are not capable of understanding. I'm gonna repeat that just to make sure it sinks in. Quantum computing does calculations in alternate dimensions. That's how it happens. And to me, the revolution in physics is something that we've never seen before. And what's going to happen in terms of the way that our timelines are impacted by dabbling in other dimensions? Most physicists are now entering fully into the territory of spirituality because it's just so advanced.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Davina, Aurora, maybe Tingying, maybe you can tell us how philosophy might impact the way that these things actually pan out in practice.
While they're thinking, I'll just make one more Kissinger point. Kissinger's point is that AI is the biggest deal for humans and human thinking since the Enlightenment. He says what's different now is during the Enlightenment, we had a set of philosophers who were thinking hard about these issues, helping us think about the transition. As he says, I think quite rightly now, there's no equivalent now. This is being mostly driven by the technologists, not by the philosophers. And therefore, we're sort of at sea as we deal with all these amazing technological advances.
And if I may make a comment, for long the question of AI focused on the fact that is AI gonna repeat or emulate human ways of thinking? In other words, a philosophical question was whether we believe in dualism or monism. And if we do believe in dualism, then the answer was that there's no way AI could emulate human ways of thinking. Or if we believe in monism, then we could create AI who would repeat humans. However, advances in machine learning has now changed the debate, and it seems AI is thinking, but not like humans, or in a very strange and peculiar way, which is a black box, but it's thinking and learning and moving forward. So I think that question again raises a lot of philosophical question in terms of what is this being, which is now a thinking being, a learning being, and but we don't understand how it's thinking and how it is progressing. So that question again, I think, is added, and we are noticing that the advancement of technology is so fast and so multidimensional, which is very hard to keep grip of it and understanding of it.
And to answer Puran's third question about how this impacts economic systems, my concern is that this being, which you describe, is actually being placed above humans when making macroeconomic decisions, when making policy decisions. So that we're living right now in a society already today in which many decisions concerning citizens' well-being are not made by a human. And this is new territory. And I think that this is where the debate should eventually end up. Are we okay with that? And this is actually, many philosophers have pointed out that this is a natural evolution from the fact that humans have failed at society, at politics. If you look at the planet, it's a big trash bin. There's conflict all over the place. We tried with God first. You know, we had theocracies all over the planet. That didn't work out. So we tried with man. We put man at the center of the stage. That didn't work out with totalitarianism in the Soviet Union, in Italy, and in Germany. When we put man as rational man, that led to colonialism, to war. So that after World War II, many philosophers point out that we're traumatized with both God's work and man's work. So right now we're silently putting everything in AI's hands. And we say, okay, AI, you make the decision whether we should fire 10,000 workers at IBM. And then, the managers at IBM could say, oh, AI said it's the best decision, but those 10,000 workers now don't have a job. And I think that's where we're at now, in which there's a homeless crisis, there's a opioid pandemic, and these are all decisions that are being driven by AI. So can we wash our hands like Pontius Pilate and say it's the AI that's making a decision in the best interest of the greater good? Or should we somehow limit AI and say, no, we want to start having humans make decisions again, even though nobody trusts humans anymore?
Or maybe a complementary situation when AI helps human to make a decision.
Yeah, exactly.
So there are some people, sorry, Puran, go ahead.
There is, on the one hand, we have technology for good. On the other hand, we have technology or technologies like AI, machine learning, and so on and so on and forth. So while AI could do what we're talking about, it could probably hold the human being to a situation called ransom, where a human mind is sort of taken away by machines, by technology, and so on and so on forth. I'm only trying to say that while we have technology for bad, quote unquote, what about the technology for good? And this is what you said. Can we really, if at all, can we really fight fire with fire? If we cannot do it, because that might mean doom and gloom, then what, as you rightly said, what could be the kind of silver lining where we could really have something back to back as technology for good, which might somehow come into the being and try and create some kind of a very counterintuitive scenario whereby human agency is protected. Because I would be very nervous to imagine a scenario where I'm going to be taken over completely by artificial intelligence, machine learning, whatever it is. And that is why now, I mean, things like management sciences, they are now embracing or imbibing how could they really try and test the thesis of profit, welfare, human development on philosophical foundation. And this is where I'm really trying to sort of figure out, can we have technology for good? How do we really put that into some kind of an operations to go and take care of the bad things with technology? On the other hand, might be trying to undertake. So that was a kind of broad context in which I was trying to talk about human agency, fire with fire, philosophical foundation, and what really happens to the technology for good if we cannot really control what bad is going to be done by technology like artificial intelligence. And as you rightly said, quantum computing could probably create a hell for each one of us, even without artificial intelligence and rest of it. So I'm only coming from that kind of a context and background, that even if we were to be taken over completely by set of technologies, we must also at the same time, as human beings, try and keep on putting some kind of a foundation which is philosophical, not religious or theocratic. So that was kind of a context from which I was coming and trying to sort of lay bare these three issues. One, philosophical foundations to AI and whatever we're talking about. The second one is all about how do we really go and use technology for good to counter technology for bad. And finally, how do we really build a pyramid of human development, human welfare, and the rest of it, which might be more powerful? We all understand the power of technology, but how could human ingenuity, human invention, and human mind, which is so fertile and has been so fertile for centuries and millennia, how do we really try and protect it in a way that technology does not really stand any chance to take the human agency over completely? That would be the end of the world, and we may not really survive to see that kind of a time as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Puran. I'd like now to hear from those who haven't made any comments, if they like to jump in. Talia, would you like to say anything?
My question is sort of amateur in comparison to what everyone has been saying. I was like totally blown away by this conversation. I am also very interested in how artificial intelligence is developing, and as probably everyone has mentioned, our generation is almost completely like influenced by social media and just the major online presence. So my question sort of backtracks and deals with data collection at its center, because there are a lot of factors that sway data collection, even with like just access to these online presences. And for private companies, it's sometimes capital and funding. For government, it's often national security or just pure national interest. So I was wondering if there can actually be truly democratized or autonomous data collection, and how individuals in turn use this unequal distribution of data collection and how that would influence the algorithm that is produced by artificial intelligence.
Great question, Talia. And I'll let Davina and Aurora have a first crack at it, and then I'll jump in with some additional comments.
And before they do, I want to see if Marian has any comment or any questions, and then we can answer all the questions in one go.
Oh, hi, everyone. No, I'm just listening in. I'm Aurora's mom, so I'm just listening to you presentation.
Oh, great. Well, nice to have you. Thank you. Thanks for joining us.
Talia, do you mind just one more time stating your question?
Data collection, I think.
Yeah, data collection. Like because of I guess the dispersed access to online presence and like access to internet resources, how would this unequal distribution influence the data that we're collecting?
It's like, so first you said it's an amateur question. It's definitely not. It's definitely a very like question that's being asked, like who gets access to the data, who gets to use it, who gets to distribute it. These are questions that we're trying to answer now and trying to figure out. So trying to answer that I think is tough. Right now, there are very lax, I guess, policies or laws on who gets the data and how it's shared. So in a sense, Dr. Albrecht, if I'm wrong, I feel like if you have, the way I've seen it is that if you have the access to it, you are easily accessible to this information. But if you, like you said, don't have like, maybe in like least developed countries who don't have access to certain infrastructures like that, don't have access to this data. But man, I don't know, maybe Aurora, you can help me a little bit.
Yeah, I think you said something about like who the disparities between who can have the means to collect the information and stuff. First of all, we talked about the facial emotion recognition and how there's a difference in culture. Like not everyone shows emotion the same way, which can recognize emotion differently in different people, which definitely creates this kind of misconception and can ascribe the wrong emotions to people and has consequences from that, which is a huge problem, because if that's used in any kind of like in any kind of criminal investigation or things like that, it can have a detrimental effect on the person. It's also like Dr. Albrecht talked about, kind of like this hierarchy with who has the technology, who is able to use it, and then sort of the people that don't have this, they go down on the hierarchy and they kind of become these people that live in the society that they don't really have that kind of power, and they kind of just have to follow the rules, if you see what I'm saying. So it definitely creates this disparity between people that have access and the people that don't have access to this technology.
And by access, she means the calibrating the technology.
Yeah.
Like who gets to put their ethical parameters into the technology. And Aurora, thanks for pointing that out, because I think, Talia, that's the main issue here, is the labeling of a sentiment or an emotion. Like say you post something online and then you have a machine that attributes your level of radicalization. How, maybe that machine misunderstood your post, but now you're being surveilled by the authorities. And it's happening all over the world. In China, they use facial emotion recognition to be able, when somebody is being interrogated by the police, and if they show signs of anxiety, then this is taken as an indication of guilt. So, who gets to code into that technology that facial expression is anxiety? Maybe that someone just has an anxious face. I'm reminded of, have you all heard of the resting angry face? Those people that just have an angry face. they're gonna be like interrogated all the time in the future, I guess.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I guess that is a quite difficult question. I mean, a lot of questions surrounding artificial intelligence is difficult. As you mentioned, that we are quite behind on like the legislation surrounding AI, but yeah, I guess this will be the center of discussion for a very long time. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your question. And what I always like to say is artificial intelligence is neither artificial nor intelligence. It's very real. It's very real, and it's not intelligent. It's just algorithmic thinking is not the same as human cognition. Humans absorb an environment in an abstract way, and then humans are also informed randomly by their past experiences, while artificial intelligence is very if then. It's just a series of domino effects. But to quickly answer your question before about the issues of equity, there's a lot of proxies being used in AI, and I don't think this is discussed enough because people think it's intelligent. But and this for example is something I've noticed in my work with the World Bank. When we don't know something, when we don't have data for something, we'll create proxies. for that. So we'll invent data sets about people that come close, according to our qualitative assessments, to indicating that thing. But those proxies are only an approximation of the ground truth, but yet they're used for policy decisions.
Well, very interesting. And we're arriving to the end of the hour. So I do like to see if you have, Eduardo, any closing remarks, and also Greg. On my part, I think at the end, the question of AI rests on our values and how we perceive ourselves and our place in this world. And so a lot of concepts that we cherished, I think we need to revisit and decide whether they have the value and importance that we placed on them in past, and what values we are ready to trade off for other things. So, and on that note, I'd like to turn the floor to Greg and Eduardo for their closing remarks.
Just one quick comment on our last conversation. That is, it seems to me, in some sense, all of this data collection could be called surveillance, but the motives are so different. And what's interesting is the people that collect the most data on us, the Googles and company, they just want to sell us stuff. So we tend not to worry much about that. Maybe we should worry more, but we do, I think, rightfully worry about things like facial recognition that might get you wrongly arrested or wrongly accused of something. So that's the technologies are all, I suppose, surveillance broadly conceived, but they have, it seems to be, different practical uses and therefore raise different sets of policy questions.
Yeah, exactly. I don't have any closing remarks. I just want to say thank you to both Pari and Greg for your support of this project. It really was born within the Global Technopolitics Forum, and now it's taking its first baby steps within the forum. So thanks for your support. It's been really great for me to have that kind of support in these conversations, which continuously inform the book and hopefully help it reach the next stage. This is just part one of part three. As you know, we're going to then start interviewing folks involved in these technologies, and then hopefully end up with some ethnography of citizens that are recipients of these decisions. So there will be more conversations to be had, but for now, thanks so much for your support, both of you, and to the forum generally.
So thanks to you, Eduardo. Great stuff.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was inspiring and questions were intriguing. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Have a good week.
Again. Have a good week.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.